Sup team, Coach Krys here. Today we are going to go over goblet squats. Goblet squats are a really great exercise if you don't have access to a barbell, heavier weights, or a squat rack. It can be a very effective exercise to still target the given area, which is our quadriceps. We still are going to be targeting our glutes as well. We'll go over that shortly, but goblet squats are awesome for that. So when we're doing goblet squats, typically we want to have just one dumbbell. And when we come and do our goblet squats, typically we want to as well have about a shoulder width distance apart with our feet. We're going to bring the dumbbell, kind of swing it up. This is where it can be kind of tough and challenging, but we want to kind of have it up towards our chest where our palms are holding onto the dumbbell. So keeping our elbows as well too close to our sides. I wouldn't flare them out or anything like that. Keeping them nice and close to your sides and really just resting the dumbbell in your palms. So when we come down, we are going to simultaneously bend our knees and our hips and come down. And a good cue is where your elbows touch your knees. So that's kind of how I know where I'm at for my ending range of motion. And then we're gonna focus on extending our knees and our glutes, squeezing our glutes at the top, making sure you're not arching that lower back. You don't get any additional activation by doing that, just standing straight up. So that's exactly what a goblet squat is gonna look like. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The issue that comes into play is if you wanna start lifting heavier. So when you're lifting heavier, like it can be pretty tough and challenging to get the dumbbell off the ground, which can be a limiting factor. So, obviously like it can be very tough if it's like really heavy because you want to kind of like grab the dumbbell and really try to scooch it up into place. That seems easy enough if the dumbbell is light, but as you get heavier and heavier, that's not optimal and typically, not putting you in a good starting position. So what can we do? Well, typically, I like to grab out a bench. I find that a bench is kind of the best height for your starting position for most people. So maybe a little high, maybe a little low, but it's gonna be better than grabbing a heavier dumbbell off of the ground. So we got our dumbbell here, and we're gonna bring it to just the edge of the bench. So that's gonna really allow us to just grab the dumbbell safely and ensure we are in a good optimal starting position. So it depends on the height of the bench. What I would do is come down, grab the dumbbell, and see if your elbows touch the bench at the height of the dumbbell. So as you can see here, I know where my ending range of motion is because of my elbows touching my knees, and the dumbbell, it's not having to be any higher or lower. So this is a good starting point for me. If you find that, your elbows are like a little bit higher and you have to like really grab the dumbbell like a lot lower, then I would still grab the dumbbell like this, stand up, and then maybe take a little bit of a step backwards so that way the bench isn't getting in your way. And that's when we're gonna go ahead and initiate the movement. So the bench is right there as well too. So at the end of the set, you can kind of just push the dumbbell forward. And as you can see, safely, you're able to initiate the movement and put the dumbbell down safely without it having to impact your lift. While we're on the topic of goblet squats, let's talk about elevating our heels. That might be a little low, might need a little bit more. For myself, I typically like to elevate my heels. There are a few reasons as to why one would want to elevate their heels. Me personally, I am trying to target my quads a lot more. Even though you are going through a full hip extension and knee extension, you are targeting the glutes when you're doing them without your heels elevated. So if you're looking to, two birds, one stone with this movement pattern, you can still effectively target your quads as well as your glutes, because what we're achieving here is knee extension as well as hip extension. It's a pretty good movement pattern for targeting both areas. But if you want to take things up just a little bit here, if you want to take things to that next level and really just build some monster quads, that's where elevating your heels comes into play. And the reason for that is because this is what's going to allow you to just drive your knees forward over your toes more effectively, which maximizes your knee flexion, aka knee bend, and that's what is really going to help you just isolate and target those quads. So that's my personal reason as to why I will elevate my heels when I do any type of squat variation. Another common reason is for somebody who has poor dorsiflexion. So if you find that at the bottom range of a squat variation, regardless if it's barbell squats or goblet squats, you're starting to butt wink. So that's where your spine is deviating and curving in. You'll notice some like spinal flexion. That is an indicator that you have poor dorsiflexion. So a good kind of band-aid way to fix it is to elevate your heels. But as well too, I would ensure that you are following a mobility program to just loosen up your ankles, so that way you can increase your dorsiflexion. So like typically before squats, like sometimes I'll try to just really open up my calf back here, really just try to focus on loosening things up, so that way I can improve my dorsiflexion when you are doing squats. So if your heels are elevating already, you know, you might as well put your feet in a more optimal position, so that way your feet aren't deviating when you are squatting. I do have a YouTube video on this. Make sure you guys go watch that. It's very informative when you're trying to decide whether or not you should be elevating your heels. But again, if you're butt winking, and for those who don't know, a butt wink is where, like I said, you're noticing some spinal flexion. So you start to come down and your lower back will start to round like this. That's typically an indicator that you have poor dorsiflexion. Elevating your heels is a good way to avoid that. So you can elevate your heels, you cannot elevate your heels. It depends on you and your preferences. It doesn't really matter. Just ensure that you are initiating the goblet squat safely. And like I said, the best way to do that is to just bring the dumbbell down on the bench like this, so that way you can easily just grab it off the bench nice and safely. You can focus on lifting heavier, and that way you can do your set. Then you can dismount safely and ensure that your gains and your strength increases aren't being compromised, because you're putting yourself into positions that compromise your form and technique. Putting the dumbbell on the bench allows you to avoid that. So give some of these tips a try, and hopefully you find them helpful.